The morning they found the man who laughed loudest frozen stiff in his own outhouse, nobody in Bitterbrush Ridge had much left to say about old Eli Cotter's hay igloo. The blizzard hadn't just been a storm, it had been a reckoning, and the rancher they once mocked, the half-deaf, limping man they said had gone soft in the head, had outlasted every one of them inside what they'd called his barnyard joke. But the truth of it, the full truth of how Eli built it, why he built it, and what he lost along the way, was buried deep in snow, in shame, and in memory, and it all began the spring before hell froze over. Eli Cotter had survived long enough to be alone. That's what it boiled down to. 3 sons gone, one to the war, one to whiskey, and the last to Wyoming. His wife, buried so long ago the cross on her grave leaned like it too was ready to lie down. By the time the spring thaw rolled into Bitterbrush Ridge, Eli was 73, long past the age where a man gets invited to town dances or card games. His ranch, which once buzzed with horses, boys, and Sunday dinners, had gone quiet but for the wind whistling through broken barn slats and the distant howling of coyotes. But that spring, Eli started doing something strange. He began hauling hay into a circle on the back slope of his land. Not just bales stacked for winter feeding. No, he was building with it, rolling hay bales into a dome shape, curving them inward like an old soddy, only taller. He hammered poles through the structure to brace the curve, packed the outside with layers of tarpaulin and wool blankets, then packed snow against the outside, again and again, until it looked like some kind of oversized prairie igloo with a chimney poking out the top. Word spread fast. This was the same Eli who once left his gate open for a week straight, thinking his cows would come back on their own. The same Eli who once mistook a deputy's car for a milk truck, so when folks saw him crawling in and out of a hay dome like a badger, with too much time and not enough sense, they laughed. They stopped on horseback to gawk. They made jokes in the saloon about Eli's hay-brained hotel or Cotter's cave of cow crap. Even Sheriff Rawley had a laugh about it. Hell, if the man wants to burrow into hay like a groundhog, let him. Better than freezing in his rocker with his boots on, he said, nursing his cup of burnt coffee at the general store. But when a young ranch hand named Ty Whitaker tried to help Eli, the old man told him off. I ain't crazy, boy. I ain't looking for warmth. I'm looking for balance, for consistency. Ever sleep in a hayloft in winter? Ever notice how it's always 10 degrees warmer than outside, even without a stove? Ty blinked. Sure, but I'm insulating, son. I'm packing layers. It ain't about looking right. It's about surviving when the valley decides to murder us all. The boy backed off. Because Eli hadn't said it like a man ranting. He said it like a man who knew. In July, the rains never came, and that stirred trouble. The cattle upstream began dying from bad water. Something in the soil went sour. Chickens stopped laying. Wild animals, foxes, cougars, even wolves, crept closer to human land in search of anything warm-blooded. The valley's old men said it felt like the kind of year nature had been saving up for. Still, Eli worked. Through the dry summer and into the amber fall, he kept reinforcing the igloo. Not just hay now. He added inner walls made of canvas and mud, trenches dug around the perimeter for runoff, and an entry tunnel so tight and low you had to crawl in like a dog. He stored food inside, not just for himself, but strange things. Dried beans, dried milk, bundles of sage, and candles, dozens of them. The inside of the dome, which at first smelled like livestock feed and mildew, began to smell like cedar wood and ash. Eli even coated the inner walls in lye-washed wool, waterproofed and fire-resistant. And then came the trapdoor. One day he disappeared for 2 full weeks. When he returned, he came up from inside the dome. From beneath it, he'd tunneled into the earth deep enough to make a root cellar that connected directly to the igloo's center. That ain't just insulation, one rancher whispered. That's a goddamn bunker. Or a tomb, someone else said. Then the winter came early, snow in October, then 2 feet more in November. The usual roads out of Bitterbrush were closed before Christmas, and by New Year's, the mail wagon had stopped running. The temperature stayed locked below zero. Snowdrifts swallowed sheds whole, roofs cracked under the weight. No one had seen a blizzard like this in decades, if ever. That's when people stopped laughing, because Eli Cotter's hay igloo didn't collapse, didn't even sag. While other ranchers scrambled to shovel snow off their rooftops at dawn, Eli's dome shed the weight easily. While glass windows shattered from the cold, Eli's layered walls stayed firm. And when a fire broke out at the Lafferty Ranch, just a spark from a stovepipe catching the dry rafters, Eli's dome, buried under snow and hay and mud, didn't even flinch. Cotter's still alive, someone said at the general store, after hiking 5 miles through knee-high snow just to find out if anyone had kerosene. How do you know? Because the smoke's still rising from his chimney. But it wasn't just smoke. One night, sometime in late January, a family of 5, one of the Cullens with 3 kids and a pregnant wife, showed up at Eli's dome after abandoning their own frozen home. They'd heard he had warmth. The father knocked, nearly weeping, while snow lashed his back like a whip. The trapdoor opened, the entry tunnel glowed, and Eli let them in. By early February, 12 people had taken refuge inside the dome, and then it collapsed. Or so everyone thought. The storm got worse. Visibility dropped to zero. Several cabins simply vanished under snowdrifts. A mother and 2 sons were found frozen beside their chimney. The house had burned from within, but the smoke couldn't vent through the snow. Everything that could go wrong did. But inside the igloo, something else was happening. Eli had planned for it. The trapdoor system allowed snow to bury the dome without sealing it. Candles inside didn't just light the place, they provided heat. The hay kept that heat in. The earthen floor held steady, unmoving, while above, the weight of snow added pressure but not collapse. The pressure, in fact, tightened the structure. And when little June Cullen got sick with fever, Eli didn't panic. He mixed herbs, burned sage, and used heated stones to make a steam chamber inside the mud-lined root cellar. He fed everyone with canned goods he'd stored underground. Nobody got frostbite, nobody starved, nobody died, nobody, except for those who stayed in their own homes. By the time the thaw began, and rescuers finally cut through the drifts to reach the outer cabins, they were finding scenes straight out of a horror story. Frozen corpses curled in beds, soot marks around burnt-out stoves, half-melted candles clutched in blue fingers. Even horses hadn't survived in some barns. The cold had turned them to statues where they stood. And then they reached Eli Cotter's hay dome. The outside was buried in snow and ice. No smoke, no sign of life. The sheriff himself was part of the team that broke through the drift and pried open the trapdoor. Inside was heat, light, 12 survivors, children, pregnant women, elderly folks, and in the back, wrapped in wool, sitting upright beside a half-burnt candle, was Eli, breathing, watching them. "I told y'all," he said in a cracked whisper, "it ain't about looking right. It's about staying warm." The townsfolk of Bitterbrush Ridge never quite decided whether what Eli Cotter built was a miracle or a freak accident engineered by a madman. Either way, when the rescue party finally brought news back to town that the old man's dome hadn't just survived but had saved nearly a dozen lives, something in the air shifted, like the wind itself had turned, and people could feel it even through the cracked boards of their homes and the layers of frost on their boots. For those still clinging to the edge of survival, cut off, starved, frostbitten, Eli's hay igloo became something more than just a joke-turned legend. It became a beacon, a whisper passed between neighbors, down trails and over snowbanks. If you can get to Cotter's, you'll make it. But by then, getting to Cotter's meant gambling with death. The snow had reached chest-high in places. Whiteouts could swallow a man in 10 steps. Fires inside homes consumed the last of the wood, and even fences were being torn down for kindling. Most folks were too weak to travel, but some tried. A teenage boy named Caleb Sturgis bundled his little sister into a wool blanket, strapped her to a broken sled, and tied the rope around his waist. They left their family's ranch near midnight, desperate and shaking, their cheeks wrapped in oil-soaked rags to keep frostbite at bay. The last thing his mother whispered before they left was, "Find the old man, tell him we tried." They never made it. Searchers found Caleb's boots buried in the snow beside a steep embankment. The girl had frozen in her sleep. He had taken off his coat to wrap her tighter. They said he'd died kneeling, but others did make it. A widow named Claire Danvers arrived with a fractured ankle and frostbitten fingers, guided by her 10-year-old daughter, who remembered the smell of hay from years ago. They knocked just before dawn, nearly unconscious. The trapdoor opened, light spilled into the drift, and Eli's lantern reached out like a hand. They joined the others already living inside. The dome was never quiet, not really. It breathed like a thing alive, low moans of wind pressing against its walls, the rustle of hay shifting with each gust outside, the ever-present drip of melting snow off the outer layer. Inside, the flicker of candlelight never stopped, and neither did the work. There were chores to do, even in that small space. Eli had them on a rhythm, each person assigned a task, no matter their age. He called it the loop, and it rotated daily. One day you'd be boiling water from melted snow. Next, tending the inner wall to ensure it hadn't soaked through, then clearing the tunnel mouth, checking the vent hole, cleaning up the earthen floor. "Idle hands freeze fastest," Eli muttered every morning. But it wasn't just about staying busy. Eli was buying them time. Unbeknownst to many inside the dome, the structure wasn't built to last forever. The hay was starting to sour, the blankets between layers slowly absorbing too much moisture, and beneath the earthen root cellar something was shifting. The ground had begun to thaw in little places, pockets of heat that threatened the integrity of the dome's central platform. Eli knew it. He'd felt it one night as he crouched alone in the dark, pressing a hand to the dirt and sensing the softness. He didn't panic. He adjusted, reinforced, repacked, but he also started rationing the candles more tightly. He spoke less, rested more. Claire noticed. "You're tired," she said one night after he winced, trying to shift a barrel of dried beans. "I'm 73, he said. "Tired's the only thing I do well." She touched his shoulder. "You built all this, Eli. You're the reason my daughter's alive. We can handle it now. You need to rest." He looked at her, not with the pride of a man who had done something great, but with the hollow eyes of someone who had done something necessary and hadn't stopped to consider the cost. "This dome ain't just hay," he said. "It's all I had left." As February rolled into March, the storm showed no sign of stopping. The records would later show that temperatures dipped to -40. Cattle froze mid-stride. Fences vanished under snowbanks that reached barn roofs. Even the town well iced over. One night, the chimney vent collapsed. It didn't cave in the dome, but it sealed the airflow. Smoke from the cooking stove backed up, causing coughing, headaches, and panic. Eli was the first to notice. "Plug the stove. Use candles instead." They obeyed. Within minutes, he was digging out the chimney tunnel by hand, crawling through a 2-foot shaft with nothing but a hatchet and a rope tied to his waist. They begged him not to go. The wind was murder, but he didn't listen. For 30 minutes, the rope didn't move. Then a tug, then two. The tunnel cleared. Smoke vented. When they pulled him back in, his fingers were blue and stiff. One glove missing, his right cheek sliced open by a shard of ice. But he was alive. "Warm me up," he whispered. "Don't need fingers to boss you lot around." They bundled him in every dry blanket left. June Cullen, now recovering from her earlier fever, lay beside him to keep his chest warm. For 3 days, he didn't speak. Then he sat up and asked about the vent like nothing had happened. By mid-March, food ran dangerously low. Eli began portioning out meals so small that even the children started asking for seconds. He kept a ledger in his head. Who ate what? How much protein remained? How many dried beans equaled a meal? He quietly stopped eating full portions himself. Claire caught him one morning tossing part of his bowl into the compost hole. "You're starving yourself. Just don't like lentils." "Eli, let me do this my way." She stared at him a long time. "You're not dying in here?" He smiled faintly. "If I die, it'll be because you're still breathing." The night the dome cracked was the night everything changed. It wasn't a full collapse, not yet, just a hairline fissure near the top, where the outer hay had dried too thin, and the snow above had frozen into a crust of ice. The weight pushed down unevenly. A groan rippled through the dome like a drumbeat. Children screamed. The candles flickered. Chunks of hay dropped from above. Eli leapt into motion. "Claire, grab the braces. June, hold that side wall. Ty, get to the trap door. If this thing goes, you run. You run hard and fast, and find higher ground. Do not wait." "No!" Claire shouted. "We can fix it." Eli was already climbing the ladder to the top brace. A series of old fence posts, lashed together with copper wire and tightened by hand. He reached the apex and drove his last wedge deeper into the hay. A groan, then silence, then stillness. The structure held for one more night. The next morning, Eli didn't wake up. He was sitting upright, blanket around his shoulders, hat over his face like he'd just nodded off. Claire pulled it back and gasped. His skin had gone pale, peaceful. His hands were folded in his lap. In his right fist was a torn scrap of old parchment, a blueprint of the dome's layout, sketched in pencil, stained with grease and ash. His final plans, and in the margins, a list of names, every person inside, all accounted for. He'd known it was coming, that his body wouldn't hold, that he'd used up the last of himself hammering the dome back into place, but he'd held on just long enough. They buried Eli inside the dome, near the base of the root cellar wall. Claire used his old coat to wrap the body. Ty built a crude cross from broken sled parts. June pressed her last peppermint candy into the dirt beside him. No one said a grand eulogy. They just stood there, lit by candlelight, warmed by the walls he'd built, listening to the storm howl outside, and stayed silent. He didn't need words. His dome said everything. By the time the storm finally broke, the survivors inside Eli Cotter's hay igloo hadn't seen the sun in 47 days. When the wind stopped screaming across the hills and the sky lightened from ash gray to a pale, aching blue, it was as if the earth had exhaled. The drifts stopped shifting. The air, though still bitter, lost its sharpness. A silence settled over the valley so complete that some wept just hearing it. The absence of the blizzard's howling was a kind of music. Ty Whitaker was the first to crawl out. He cleared the chimney vent again and tunneled out of the trapdoor entrance with Eli's rusted spade and Claire's kitchen knife tied to the end of a fence pole. Every foot of progress was a risk. The snow had crusted with an ice shell on top, sharp enough to cut skin and heavy enough to collapse without warning. But he kept digging, inch by inch, hour by hour. When he finally emerged onto the surface, blinking into the pale morning, what he saw was not a world he recognized. The entire valley had been remade. Cabins were unrecognizable, flattened under weight or partially burned and now frozen over, blackened wood peeking from white mounds like ribs from a corpse. Fences were gone. Trees had split in half under ice load. The familiar trail markers were buried. And nothing moved. No smoke from chimneys, no barking dogs, no riders in the distance. Bitterbrush Ridge had been silenced, and then he saw the crows. They were perched in clusters on the few exposed rooftops, on fence posts, barely poking through the drifts, even atop frozen carcasses. They were still, silent, watching, unnaturally quiet. Ty felt something tighten in his chest. He turned back and slid into the tunnel. When his boots hit the packed earth floor, Claire ran to meet him. "Well, it's clear. The storm's over, but it's not good out there." She didn't ask him to explain. She just nodded. It was time to decide what came next. They held a quiet meeting inside the igloo that night, 12 of them, sitting in a rough circle lit by 6 half-burned candles, the flame light dancing over hollow cheeks and tired eyes. Claire, though not the oldest, had stepped into the role Eli once held, not by force, but by necessity. Her voice was steady. The others listened. "We have to reach town," she said. "If anyone's alive out there, they'll be in worse shape than us." "But what if there's no one?" asked Ruthie Cullen, the pregnant woman who'd arrived weeks earlier, her belly now swollen near bursting. "What if it's just us now?" "It's not," said Ty. "There's tracks, crows, something survived out there. Maybe not people, but something. We've got to know." Claire nodded. "We'll split into 3 teams. Ty and I will head toward the main road. Old Cooper's farm was just a mile west. If it's still standing, it'll give us high ground to spot other homesteads." "The rest of us?" asked June, her voice thin. "Keep the dome alive. Keep Ruthie warm. Boil snow. Keep the vent open. We'll signal if we find help." The plan was simple, but like most things in that winter, execution was everything. Ty and Claire left before dawn, wrapped in every dry layer they could find. Ty had a thick scarf made from an old horse blanket. Claire wore Eli's oversized coat, the sleeves folded twice at the wrists. They trudged west, following the rise of the land, using only the tips of buried fence posts to guide them. With every step, the crunch of ice beneath their boots echoed like gunshots. The air was brittle. One misstep could snap an ankle, but they moved fast. By noon they saw it, Cooper's barn, or what was left of it. The roof had caved in, and one of the stone walls had collapsed. The main house beside it was gone, just a jagged chimney sticking out from a snowdrift. But the barn's loft, half exposed, still stood high enough to give them a view. They climbed it, silent, and from that perch they saw the truth. Bitterbrush Ridge was dead. Smoke curled from only 2 places in the entire valley, the igloo and a distant column several miles southeast, too far to be another homestead, likely the remnants of the old telegraph station, or maybe a mountain cave where someone had built a fire. Nothing else. No riders, no wagons, no lights, just frost, silence, and the shadows of things buried. They returned to the dome by dusk, their legs half numb, their faces burned raw by wind. The others had kept it warm. Ruthie was having contractions. Claire took her aside while Ty pulled June and 2 of the older boys into a corner. "Tomorrow," he said, "we go south, follow the smoke." "Is it far?" one boy asked. "Too far for children, but we'll try it anyway." June gripped his sleeve. "I'm going." He didn't argue. He knew better than to waste breath telling June Cullen she couldn't do something. The next morning, they packed what little they had. 2 days of rations, 3 candles, a jar of snow melt, Eli's old revolver, rusted but functional. They left behind a code. If they were gone more than 3 days, the dome would collapse the trapdoor and move the vent, seal themselves in, dig no further. Trust no sounds from above. "Don't come after us," Claire told Ruthie. "We'll find help or die trying." Then she and Ty and June walked south into a white world. The journey was brutal. Snow swallowed them past the knees. Ice crusted their boots. Twice they slipped on hidden slopes and nearly vanished into drifts. They took turns carrying June when her strength flagged. Once they heard a distant howl, thin, sharp, like a wolf, but it never came close. On the second day, they found a corpse, a man in a black coat, curled under a wagon with one gloved hand reaching toward the sky. His face was frozen mid-expression, lips cracked open. Claire said a prayer, then took the coat. They reached the second smoke plume just before sunset. It was not the telegraph station. It was a hole in the earth, a sinkhole, widened by melting with a structure dug into its side. A dugout, old and weather-worn, likely built by prospectors decades earlier and abandoned. Someone had returned. Smoke curled from a pipe chimney. A hand-painted sign hung over the door, Lord, spare the humble. Claire knocked. No answer. She knocked again. Still nothing. Ty stepped forward and opened the door slowly. Inside were 5 people, alive. The room was dim, lit by a single oil lamp. 3 adults and 2 children, all wrapped in tattered wool. The oldest man, grey-bearded, rail-thin, and hunched, blinked at them from behind frost-fogged spectacles. "You come from the dome?" he asked, as if it were already legend. Claire nodded. "We need help. There's 7 more. A pregnant woman. No more food." The man stood slowly. "Then we move. But the cold, no colder than dying where you stand." The return journey took longer. 2 of the children had to be carried. Supplies were shared. Twice they built small fires in snow-dug hollows just to stay alive. One man died the second night. Heart failure, they guessed. They buried him under a cairn of ice. They reached the dome on the 3rd day. Ruthie had given birth. A boy, they named him Eli. Over the next weeks, things shifted. More survivors appeared. Stragglers, loners, whole families moving like ghosts across the ice fields. All were drawn to the dome, spoken of like a myth. They brought news. The telegraph lines were dead. No help was coming from outside the valley. Roads were impassable. The government might not even know how bad it had gotten. And spring, still weeks away, so they fortified the dome, dug more tunnels, built new shelters, and always they told the story of the old man with a limp and a vision, the man who saw the cold coming before anyone else, the man they all laughed at. It was not a spring that came, but a slow thaw, like a wound refusing to scab over. April arrived with more silence than warmth, and even when the wind stopped biting, it still watched. The sun returned but could not decide whether to shine or just hover behind gauze-thin clouds. What little melted in the valley froze again by morning. It was not rebirth, it was resistance. By now, 41 souls lived in and around what had once been called Eli Cotter's Hay Igloo. No one called it that anymore, not with a smirk, not with mockery. They called it the Dome, and the word came from their mouths like a kind of prayer, something between reverence and awe. The original structure still stood, though now it served as the heart of a larger sprawl. Dugouts and snow tunnels spidered out from it. Some were shelters, others were storage pits. A few were no more than trenches filled with hay and cloth where survivors could lie 2 at a time, warming each other by touch. Claire kept count. She used Eli's old ledger book, writing names by candlelight in what space remained between his long-dead cattle inventories, and pencil-sketched maps of the land, page after page, a census of the living, written among the ruins of the old. Ty and June organized patrols, not for security, but for salvage. Every morning, 2 or 3 bodies would trek to collapsed cabins or half-frozen barns, searching for tools, food, cloth, anything. Most days they came back empty-handed. Sometimes they came back with more survivors. Once they came back with a girl who hadn't spoken since her mother froze to death in front of her, curled up by a wood stove that had run out of wood. They gave her Eli's hat. She never took it off. But the snow wasn't the only thing threatening them now. The real danger was collapse, not of the structures, but of the people. Food was low, nerves were fraying, babies cried at night and wouldn't stop. The smell of humanity, unwashed, unbathed, hungry, clung to everything. No one had been warm in weeks, only less cold, and worst of all, disease had crept in. A cough, then a fever, then another cough, deeper, wetter. The boy named Elias, the first of the Cullens' cousins to arrive after the thaw, started bleeding from the gums. He died in his sleep on the 2nd night after coughing into his blanket all evening. Claire took his body to the south tunnel with Ty and buried him under a cairn of packed snow. No one asked if it was safe to keep burying dead that close to camp. The ground was frozen. They had no choice. By the end of April, 4 more had died. 2 elderly men, 1 newborn, and a woman who went to sleep and simply never woke. It was not a crisis. It was attrition. Slow, grinding, inevitable. Then came the rider. No one heard him approach. The horses were long dead or had wandered off into the hills when their barns collapsed. Sleds had been the only movement for months. But on the 2nd day of May, just as June and Ty were hauling back a salvaged iron skillet from the Barlow place, they heard a distant snort, then hooves, real rhythmic hooves. They froze, and over the ridge came a man in a blue-grey coat, one hand holding his reins, the other wrapped in gauze. He looked half-starved, his beard full of ice, but his eyes were wide and aware. He spotted them, pulled the horse to a rough stop, and raised a hand. "Is it true?" he croaked. "The dome?" They stared. "I came from the telegraph post. I rode northeast until the road vanished. Folks said if you made it west of the ridgeline, there was someone who'd built a dome of hay and saved an entire family. I thought they were delirious." "You found it," Ty said. The rider laughed, then pitched sideways off his horse. His name was Jonah Harlow, former telegraph operator. He'd held the station through the worst of the storm, surviving off dried beef and snowmelt, until the chimney iced over and the roof cracked. Then he rode south, hoping to find open roads. Instead, he found death. Frozen wagons, burned-out shacks, animal carcasses gnawed by something desperate, and whispers scrawled in chalk on fences, etched into the frost on windows, even scratched into barn doors. "Go to the dome." "I thought it was a fever dream," Jonah said, "but when I saw the smoke, I knew." He stayed one night, rested, ate, told them what news he had, and in the morning Claire made her decision. "We're not just surviving anymore," she said, standing in the center of the dome as every able-bodied person gathered. "We're signaling. We need to reach the nearest outpost and tell them where we are. The country thinks we're dead. If we don't send word, spring will come and find us bones in a snowbank." Jonah couldn't ride any farther, but the horse could, so Ty and June volunteered. Again. "No," Claire said, putting a hand on June's shoulder. "You've done enough." June shook her head. "He needs me, and you need to stay here." Claire relented. The girl was stubborn as rock and twice as grounded. They packed what little dried food they had left, rolled up a map that Jonah had scratched into a rag, tied everything to the horse, and watched the pair ride east toward the canyon pass that led out of the valley. It was the last time Claire saw them for over a month. The days crawled, the weather warmed, the dome sagged. Without Eli's constant repair, the structure was decaying, the hay was rotting, mold crept in the seams. Claire and the older men reinforced the tunnels with poles and bark, but it was a losing game. The dome had done its part. It was time to move. But to where? The only trail was the one Ty and June had taken. If they failed, if they died out there, then Bitterbrush Ridge would become a graveyard with one warm tomb at its center. Some began to whisper, "We should leave now, find the river. There might be towns downstream. Or we build again, another dome, bigger this time. Or we take our chances in the hills." Claire silenced them all with one gesture. She pointed to the ledger book. "These names," she said. "This is our town now, and until someone tells me otherwise, we are staying." But every night, she stared at the horizon, hoping to see motion, a figure, a fire, anything. Instead, one evening, she saw smoke, black smoke, not from the dome, not from any shelter. It rose from the eastern ridgeline like a funeral pyre. They feared the worst, a fire, a collapse, maybe even someone coming for them, not to help, but to take. Claire armed the strongest men with Eli's tools, shovels, hatchets, one old revolver with 2 bullets left. She set up watches, dug a trench around the main tunnel. For 3 nights they waited, and on the 4th morning, the riders came, 5 of them, on horses, bundled in wool, faces wind-burnt but smiling, and between them, tied to a sled, were Ty and June, alive. The story spilled from their mouths faster than breath. They'd made it through the pass, found a surveyor's camp. The men there had horses, radio, supplies. When they learned what had happened in Bitterbrush Ridge, they rode out instantly. It had taken them days, but they'd come. "There's more on the way," June said, her voice hoarse but proud. "Doctors, wagons, food," she pointed to the east. "Help is coming." And help did. Over the next 2 weeks, the survivors of the worst winter in 75 years were dug out, fed, warmed, counted. The final tally, 68 lives saved by a structure made of hay, mud, cloth, and stubbornness. The dome didn't last. With spring came rain, and the walls collapsed. But by then, no one needed it. They planted a wooden post at the site. Not a monument, not a marker, just a plank of pine, hammered into the thawing earth, burned into its surface with the tip of Eli's old knife. He saw it coming. Spring, when it truly came, didn't announce itself with fanfare or flower bloom. It came quietly, melting the edges of death like wax off a forgotten candle. The snow didn't vanish. It retreated, slowly and suspiciously, exposing what had been lost and what had been kept alive. The dome by then had collapsed in on itself like a tired beast. The walls of hay, so meticulously built by Eli Cotter's hand, had bowed outward, softened by rain and sun, their seams unraveling. Grass pushed up around the base where feet had once tamped snow and packed mud. The smell of rot began to mix with thawed earth. Still, no one touched it. No one moved to tear it down or clear it away. It was a grave now, Eli's grave, and a relic, even after help arrived in full. Supply wagons rumbling in behind mules, doctors in thick wool coats stepping down with satchels of quinine and dried meat, officials with papers and questions and too much starch in their collars. The survivors of Bitterbrush Ridge walked softly, around the ruin, like a church left to weather, or a battlefield never consecrated. They rebuilt, slowly, not in the same place, not over Eli's dome. Instead, they moved to the ridge, to higher ground, where the meltwater wouldn't drown them and the wind carried warmth instead of death. They built lean-tos, then cabins, dug wells, cleared new fields, horses returned, chickens clucked again, children stopped coughing. But every morning, someone still walked the trail down to the site of the dome, just to sit by the grave, to remember, to thank. The government, when it caught wind of what had happened, sent men in boots and uniforms. They brought pamphlets, declarations, reporters. They wanted to understand how a hay dome, had done what dozens of state-funded relief stations hadn't. They took measurements. They took photos. They asked Claire to speak. She refused. "Write your stories," she told them, "but don't twist his name." "Whose name?" the man asked. "The one who saved us, Eli Cotter." It wasn't long before they tried to own it. Newspapers called it the miracle at Bitterbrush. Some wrote that Eli had been a recluse scientist. Others painted him as a backwoods prophet. A few claimed he'd read almanacs or been warned by native trackers. One tabloid out east even suggested he'd had a vision. But the truth was simpler. He just paid attention. He saw the signs: dry spring, dying cattle, red sun in the evening skies, early frost, ice forming in odd places. He'd seen a pattern forming that no one else dared admit. While others played cards or prayed or planted again out of habit, he prepared. And when he built the dome, he didn't do it to prove anything. He did it to survive. He did it because somewhere inside, despite all the losses life had dealt him, he still believed in the worth of a body staying warm, not out of pride, out of defiance. Years passed. The new settlement on the ridge kept growing. They named it Cotter's Rise. No one forgot the winter. No one forgot the dome. Every child born after was told the story, not as folklore, but as truth. Once there was a man who everyone thought was crazy. He built a house of hay. They laughed. He let them. And when the sky turned to ice, and the wind screamed, and death came on silent feet, that man's hay dome held. And the lesson, repeated over and over, was not just about preparedness. It wasn't even about stubbornness. It was about conviction, about not needing permission to do what you knew was right. Claire lived the rest of her life in Cotter's Rise. She raised June as her own and helped Ruthie's son, Eli, build the first true schoolhouse on the hill above the old dome's remains. She never remarried. She never left. She kept Eli's ledger, wrapped in oilcloth, and opened it every winter to read the names aloud on the anniversary of the storm's end. It became a tradition, a solemn roll call. Each year, fewer remembered the jokes. Each year, more remembered the man. Ty Whitaker moved east eventually, joined up with a surveyor's company. He wrote letters back, sent money, but the dome never left him. His sketches of it, done on yellowing pages during those freezing nights, became blueprints copied across other valleys. He swore by the structure's logic, said if you did it right, it could hold heat like a thermos, could breathe just enough to vent smoke, could cradle life, even while the world tried to squeeze it dead. Other domes were built years later, when another bad winter came. Most stood, a few didn't, but none were ever his. Only Eli's was the dome. When June came of age, she took over the school, taught the children about grit, survival, physics too, the principles of thermal insulation, why hay works, why snow, if packed just right, protects instead of smothers. But she always told the story last. She told it not as a parable, but as biography. She told them about the way Eli Cotter used to talk with his head tilted to one side, listening through the ear that still worked, about how he scolded everyone for letting the stove burn too high, about how he rationed his own food until his hands shook, about how he died with his hat over his eyes and a candle still burning beside him, and how the candle didn't go out until the snow started to melt. No statue was ever built for Eli Cotter. That's not what he would have wanted. Instead, they planted a single pine tree over his grave, where the dome had once stood. Every spring, when the snow receded and the grass began to crawl back over the field, the children of Cotter's Rise would run barefoot to that pine tree, circle it, and lay a fresh bundle of hay at its base, not because they had to, but because someone once had to. And if you go there now, if you hike high enough into the Bitterbrush Ridge and turn your back to the modern highway and close your eyes, you might still hear the wind rush across the snow the way it did that winter. And if you listen closely, you might hear the old timbers creak, the rustle of hay shifting in the cold, and a voice like dry cotton whisper, "It ain't about looking right, it's about staying warm." And that's when you'll understand. Sometimes the world is saved not by heroes, not by miracles, not even by fire, but by hay, by stubbornness, by an old man with one good ear and too much loss behind him to care what anyone thought, and by a dome no one believed in until it held.